Invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Nora Beaumont almost threw it away. It was tucked between a water bill and a catalog she hadn't ordered. Cream-colored envelope with gold lettering, the kind of stationery that tries too hard. She stood at the kitchen counter, coat still on, reading it twice. Cordially invited to the Hargrove and Associates 30th Anniversary Gala. Black tie. Ballroom at the Whitmore. Saturday, October 11th. Then, in handwriting at the bottom, blue ink, looping and familiar in the worst possible way. Hope you can make it, Nora. It wouldn't be the same without you. She set the envelope down. She picked it up again. She put it in the recycling bin, then stood there for a long moment before pulling it back out. Her daughter, Imani, called that evening. Nora was on the couch, still in her work clothes, the invitation on the coffee table like something that needed to be diffused. "You're quiet," Imani said. "I got something in the mail today." "Good something or bad something?" Nora looked at Derek Hargrove's handwriting. "It wouldn't be the same without you." She knew exactly what that meant. She had known Derek Hargrove for 31 years. She knew what he meant when he said things like that. She knew what kind of man sent handwritten notes to women he had spent the better part of 3 decades trying to make feel small. "I don't know yet," she said. "Here's what you need to understand about Nora Beaumont before the rest of this story makes sense. She grew up in Decatur, Georgia. Her father drove a city bus for 22 years. Her mother cleaned offices downtown 3 nights a week while finishing her nursing degree at 44 years old. They were not poor in the way that breaks people, but they were not comfortable in the way that makes people forget where they came from. Nora understood the weight of a dollar before she understood algebra. She wore the same winter coat for 4 years. She packed her lunch every day through high school and sat with it at a corner table in the cafeteria near the vending machines because that table, for whatever reason, nobody wanted. She was quiet. She was sharp. She read everything. And she was, in the particular way that schools sometimes produce, entirely invisible to the people who decided who mattered. Until she wasn't. She won a full scholarship to Emory. She graduated top of her class. She went to law school, clerked for a federal judge, and spent the next decade building a reputation in corporate litigation that was, by any measure, exceptional. She became a partner at 51. The first black woman partner in the history of Caldwell and Reese. The article in Atlanta Business Chronicle used the word trailblazing. She hated that word. It implied that the path hadn't existed before her, which wasn't true. The path had existed. They'd just been blocking it. She had a daughter she adored, a house in Buckhead she'd bought herself, and a practice that commanded respect in rooms that hadn't always been willing to give it. She had not, in 30 years, set foot in a room with Derek Hargrove by choice. Derek Hargrove. Where do you even begin? He was the kind of person who had never, not once in his life, been forced to reckon with himself. Born into a family that owned 3 car dealerships and a commercial real estate portfolio, attended the same private school his father had attended, then his grandfather. He wore his privilege like a blazer, comfortable, tailored, never questioned. He and Nora had overlapped at Emory. She had been on scholarship. He had been on legacy. In a study group for constitutional law, first semester, he had looked at her across the table, really looked in that assessing way, and said in front of 4 other people, "You must be one of the diversity admits." He hadn't said it with malice. That was the thing. He'd said it like a compliment. Like he was acknowledging that she'd gotten in through a different, lesser door, and wasn't that nice for her. She had said nothing. She was 22 years old, and she was on a scholarship that required a 3.5 GPA, and one misstep could rearrange her entire life. And she had learned, in the way that black women learn it early and at cost, that saying something in that room would not end well for her. She said nothing. She studied harder than anyone in that group. She scored higher than Derek on every exam. She graduated with honors. He graduated with connections. They moved in overlapping professional circles for the next decade. He built Hargrove and Associates, corporate law, old money clients, the kind of firm that didn't need to advertise. She built her career in the same city, in the same industry, through entirely different means. They were not enemies in any formal sense. They simply existed on parallel tracks, occasionally crossing. But Nora remembered the study group. She remembered his voice. She remembered his voice. She remembered looking down at her notes and deciding that silence was the only move available to her. She had been deciding that for 30 years. The gala was framed as a celebration. 30 years of Hargrove and Associates, a tribute to the firm's legacy, its growth, its contributions to the Atlanta legal community. There would be a dinner, remarks, a slideshow. The invitation listed the evening's honorary chairs, 3 senior partners, 2 federal judges, and there, near the bottom, Nora Beaumont, named as a distinguished guest of honor. Imani, who had looked up the event online while they were still on the phone, read that part aloud. Distinguished guest of honor, she said. That's actually a good title. It's bait, Nora said. Imani was quiet for a moment. She knew enough of the history. Not all of it, Nora had never given her all of it, but enough. So don't go. I know. Or go and let him look at what you built. Nora picked up the invitation, turned it over. There was a response card. Accepts with pleasure, declines with regrets. She thought about the study group table. The 4 other students who had heard and said nothing. The way Derek had smiled after, as if he'd said something generous. I'll think about it, she said. She RSVP'd the next morning. Accepts with pleasure. The weeks before the gala were unremarkable in the particular way that weeks before something are always unremarkable. Life continued. Nora had a trial in November she was preparing for. She had a mentee, a second-year associate named Kezia, who was brilliant and anxious and reminded Nora, sometimes, of herself at that age in ways that were both tender and difficult. She had dinners with Imani. She had early mornings and long evenings, and the particular quiet of a house that belonged entirely to you. She did not tell people she was going to the gala. Her assistant, Thomas, saw the calendar entry and raised an eyebrow. Hargrove thing? Yes. He nodded slowly, in the way Thomas nodded when he had thoughts he was choosing not to share. He'd worked with Nora for 11 years. He knew the landscape. What are you wearing? He asked. I haven't decided. Wear the navy, he said. The structured one. Thomas. You look like a verdict in that jacket. She thought about it. Maybe the navy, she said. The night of the gala, Nora arrived alone. She had considered bringing someone. Her friend Rochelle had offered, twice, enthusiastically. But Nora had decided she would arrive alone, the way she had always arrived, without requiring anyone else to anchor her presence in a room. The Whitmore was exactly what it sounded like. Grand ballroom, vaulted ceilings, the kind of event lighting that makes everyone look like they're being photographed for something important. There was a cocktail hour, string quartet, servers with trays. The room was full of people who all knew each other in the comfortable, overlapping way of a single industry in a single city. Nora moved through the room. She was recognized. She was greeted. She had been in Atlanta long enough and had done enough work that her name opened conversations. She accepted a glass of water, refused 3 glasses of champagne, and made her way through the crowd with the unhurried ease of someone who had learned, a long time ago, that entering a room slowly was always better than entering it quickly. Derek Hargrove found her near the silent auction table. He was 63, silver-haired, still wearing his money the way he always had. Comfortably and obviously, he smiled when he saw her. The smile of a man who has never once considered that someone might be smiling back at him differently than they appeared to be. Nora, he said. You came. I did, she said. You look wonderful. He said it the way men like Derek said things like that, appraising, as if her appearance was something he had the authority to evaluate. Thank you for the invitation, she said. Of course, of course. He touched her elbow briefly, steering her slightly as if they were going somewhere together, which they were not. We wanted someone like you here. You know, to show what the Atlanta legal community looks like now. There it was. 31 years, and he was still holding the same door. Still gesturing through it with the same expression. Someone like you. to show what it looks like now. She was still, in his framing, a symbol, a demonstration of diversity and progress, invited to stand in his ballroom and reflect well on his occasion. She smiled. "It's a beautiful venue," she said, and excused herself. Dinner was 8 courses and ran long. Nora sat at a table with 2 federal judges she respected, a partner from a firm she'd worked against for years and liked enormously, and 3 people she didn't know who turned out to be interesting. She ate well. She had actual conversations. She reminded herself, not for the first time, that events like this contained multitudes, that Derek Hargrove was not the whole room, no matter how much he had organized it. The remarks began at 9. Derek stood at the podium in his element, comfortable, expansive. He spoke about the firm's history, its values, its people. He named partners who had passed away with appropriate reverence. He acknowledged the city. He thanked his family. He was, Nora had to admit, a competent speaker. He had the pacing of a man who had given many toasts and knew how to hold a room. Then came the slideshow. It was the kind of slideshow that firms put together for anniversary events, photographs spanning the decades, faces and offices and moments, set to understated music. Nora watched it with mild interest. And then her photograph appeared. It was a photograph from an article. The Atlanta Business Chronicle piece from 2019. It was a good photograph. She looked composed, serious, seated at a conference table. But the caption Derek had chosen, projected on a screen in front of 300 people, read, "A testament to what's possible when we open our doors." The room applauded. Nora sat very still. A testament to what's possible when we open our doors. Not her work, not her record, not 30 years of cases won and arguments made and hours spent. No, when we open our doors. He had taken her photograph, her face, her achievement, and turned it into a sentence about his generosity. The woman next to her, one of the federal judges, leaned slightly in Nora's direction. Her name was Judge Patricia Osei. She said nothing. She simply placed her hand briefly on the table near Nora's hand and then withdrew it. A small, precise gesture. "I see it. I see you see it." Nora nodded, almost imperceptibly. The slideshow moved on. The open remarks came near the end of the evening. A portion of the program where guests were invited to share memories of the firm, tributes, reflections. Several people spoke. They were warm and brief. Nora listened. Then Derek looked across the room and found her. "I'd be remiss," he said, still at the podium, "if I didn't ask our distinguished guest of honor to say a few words. Nora Beaumont, the pride of the Atlanta bar." Polite, expectant applause. Nora took a breath. She set down her water glass. She stood. She walked to the podium at the unhurried pace of someone who had decided, a long time before she stood up, exactly what she was going to say. She thanked Derek for the invitation. She said it was a meaningful evening. She acknowledged the colleagues in the room she genuinely respected by name because they deserved it. And then she said, 31 years ago, I sat in a study group at Emory with a man who told me in front of witnesses that I was probably a diversity admit." She paused. She did not look at Derek. She looked at the room, at the faces, at the judges, at the younger people seated near the back. "I didn't say anything. I was 22 years old, I was on scholarship, and I had learned that saying something would cost more than silence. So I stayed quiet, and I went home, and I studied." The room was completely still. "I graduated with honors. I clerked for Judge Harrison in the 11th Circuit. I tried 43 federal cases and won 38 of them. I built a practice, and I made partner, and I have spent the last decade mentoring young lawyers, especially young black women, because someone has to be in those rooms before they arrive." She paused again. "I'm not here tonight as a testament to someone else's open doors. I'm here because I opened my own, and I want anyone in this room who has been told, directly or indirectly, or in the quiet language of a caption on a screen, that your presence is an act of someone else's generosity, to understand something it isn't. Your presence is yours. Your work is yours. Don't let anyone curate your story into theirs." She stepped back from the podium. The applause began slowly. Then it grew. She walked back to her seat without looking at Derek Hargrove. She didn't need to. She had not said his name. She hadn't needed to. Judge Osei leaned over as Nora sat down and said quietly, "That was one of the finest things I have ever heard said in a room full of lawyers." Nora reached for her water. "I've been rehearsing it for 30 years, she said. People talked to her for the rest of the night. Not the performing of social obligation, actual conversation. A young associate from a firm she didn't know stood in front of her with the careful formality of someone who had rehearsed their approach and said that she had come to the gala specifically because Nora was listed as an honoree and that she had read everything she could find about her career. Nora looked at her, young, composed. The particular kind of self-possession that comes from practicing it. "What's your name?" Nora asked. "A Daisy," she said. "A Daisy Naji, second year." "Where are you?" "Kaminsky and Cole." Nora nodded, solid firm. "Hard first years. How is it?" A Daisy considered the question. "It's fine," she said carefully, in the way that meant it was not entirely fine. "Let me give you my card," Nora said. "Not for networking, just so you have it." A Daisy took the card the way people take things they will keep. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Nora said. "Come find me when you actually need something." Derek Hargrove did not approach Nora directly for the rest of the evening. She was aware of his presence at the periphery, the way you're aware of weather. At one point, he was in conversation with 2 other senior partners, and she caught the particular quality of a glance in her direction, not hostile, not apologetic. Something else. Something she recognized as recalibration. The adjustment of a man who has been accustomed to controlling a narrative and has just watched it step outside his hands. She felt no satisfaction. That surprised her slightly. She had expected to feel something sharpened and solid, the clarity of a thing finally said. But what she felt was quieter than that. Less triumphant, more like a door she had held closed for a long time had opened, and now she was simply standing in the afterward. She stayed until 10:30. Said her goodbyes, thanked her table. In the car, she called Imani. "How was it?" Imani asked. She sounded like she had been waiting. "I said something," Nora said. "A beat." "What did you say?" Nora told her. Imani was quiet through most of it, and at the end said, "Mom." Just that. The single syllable that contains, in the language between mothers and daughters, an entire conversation. "I know," Nora said. "How do you feel?" Nora thought about it. Outside the window, Atlanta was doing what Atlanta did, lit up and in motion and indifferent and alive. "Like myself," she said. "For the first time in a long time in that kind of room, I felt exactly like myself." The clip circulated the following week. Someone had recorded the remarks. Not discreetly. Nora had been aware of phones in the crowd, though she had not let herself think about them in the moment. The clip was 47 seconds, just the part starting from, "I'm not here tonight," as a testament. It moved through legal Twitter, then LinkedIn, then further. She did not watch it. Her assistant Thomas watched it. He told her, without being asked, that the comments were largely what you would expect, admiring. A few dismissive, 1 or 2 from young lawyers that said versions of "this is why I went to law school." He said it quietly, simply, in the way Thomas communicated things he found significant. "Okay," Nora said. "The Daisy girl emailed," he added. "Already?" "Last night. She asked if you'd be willing to have coffee sometime." Nora had not been to the office of Kaminsky and Cole in several years. She thought about what it looked like in there. Who was in those halls and who wasn't? "Set it up," she said. She did not hear from Derek Hargrove directly, a mutual acquaintance. Someone who moved through both their circles with the careful diplomatic neutrality of someone who liked attending events, mentioned, casually, over lunch the following month, that Derek had found the remarks pointed. "Pointed," Nora repeated. "His word," the acquaintance said. She said, and moved on to something else. She was not angry. She had been angry for 30 years, quietly and precisely, and she had done something with it. built it into the architecture of her work, her choices, her practice. She had poured it into cases and into the careers of the Adazi-Najis and the Casias, and every young attorney she'd pulled through a door that she'd had to push open herself. That was what anger could be if you were careful with it. Not a performance, not a confrontation at a podium. Well, sometimes a confrontation at a podium, but mostly something more patient, a long, quiet accumulation of work that answered the question of what you were capable of more thoroughly than any argument ever could. In December, Nora was named to the board of the Georgia Bar Foundation. The announcement was brief and factual, as announcements of that kind are. Imani texted her a single photograph, a woman standing at a podium, head up, room behind her. No caption. Nora texted back, "Stop it." Imani replied, "Never." There's a version of this story that ends with Derek Hargrove's firm losing a major client, or with a public apology, or with some visible, legible consequence that lands with the weight of fairness. People want that version. They want the helicopter on the lawn. They want the room to gasp. But that is not always how it goes. Sometimes the thing you spent 30 years preparing to say is finally said in front of 300 people, and the man it was meant for absorbs it in silence and moves on, and the world does not stop. The string quartet plays again. The servers collect the dessert plates. And you walk to your car alone, and you call your daughter, and you drive home through a city that contains your entire life. And somewhere behind you, a young woman named Adazi is sitting at her desk, looking at your business card, deciding whether to email. She decides yes. That's the part that matters. That's always been the part that matters. But keep thinking about that caption on the screen. A testament to what's possible when we open our doors. 8 words. And in 8 words, 30 years of Nora's work got quietly reassigned to someone else's generosity. That's the part that stayed with me longest, not the speech. The caption. Because here's what I've come to understand. The world doesn't always take things from you loudly. Sometimes it does it in gold lettering, in a polite invitation, in a caption on a projector screen in a room full of people who applaud before they think about what they're applauding for. Nora could have let it go. A lot of people would have. She was 60-something years old. She was accomplished. She was respected. What did she need to prove, and to whom? That's the quiet logic of letting things slide. Pick your battles. It's not worth it. You're above this. But I don't think that's what kept her silent all those years. I think what kept her silent was the same thing that keeps a lot of people silent. The very real, very rational calculation that speaking would cost more than she could afford to lose. At 22, that calculation was correct. The scholarship was real. The risk was real. Silence was the only instrument available to her in that moment, and she used it with precision. What changed is that she spent the next 30 years building until silence was no longer the only option. That's not an accident. That's not luck. That's a specific kind of intelligence. Not just the intelligence of knowing the law, but the intelligence of knowing which room you're in, what it will cost you to speak, and what it will cost you not to. Nora understood that second cost clearly. She just had to spend 3 decades making sure she could pay it. And when she finally spoke, she didn't speak to Derek. She spoke to the room, to the younger people near the back, to Adazi, who she didn't know was there yet. That choice, who you aim your words at, that tells you everything about a person's character. She wasn't there to wound someone. She was there to say something true that needed to be in the air of that room, because someone younger was breathing it. That's what I think about when I think about what it actually means to do right by people. Not the grand gesture, not the confrontation that makes for a good story. The card given to a second-year associate at the end of a long night. The willingness to say, "Come find me," when you actually need something, and mean it. The decision to build something with your anger rather than just spend it. It took all 3. The moral clarity to know what had been wrong, even when naming it wasn't safe. The discipline to build a record so thorough that the truth of it was undeniable, and the endurance to carry 30 years of quiet without letting it make her bitter or small. She walked out of that ballroom the same person who walked in. Just finally fully heard. That's the part that doesn't make it onto a projector screen. But it's the part that lasts.